A few years ago, my husband and I planned a little getaway to Yosemite. Instead of staying inside the park, we booked a place in El Portal, which is close enough to get into the valley during the day, but quiet at night. One evening, after a long day of hiking and sightseeing, we were driving back along the narrow roads that twist through the mountains. It was dark, pitch black outside the glow of our headlights, when I noticed something strange on the side of the road. At first, it just looked like a dark shape, but as we got closer, I could clearly make out two legs stretched out toward the pavement. I turned to my husband and said, "There's someone lying there." He didn't believe me at first and tried to brush it off, saying it was probably just trash bags catching the light. But I was convinced. I couldn't let it go. "That was a person," I kept repeating, staring out the back window as the shape slipped into the darkness behind us. When we finally pulled into the hotel parking lot, my husband looked over at me. He saw how serious I was and asked, "Do you want to go back and check?" Without even hesitating, I said yes. So we turned the car around and drove back toward where I'd seen the figure. As soon as the headlights hit that patch of road again, I spotted the legs. "Stop the car!" I shouted. He slowed down, rolled down his window and called out, "Hey, are you all right?" At first there was nothing, just silence. Then, out of nowhere, the person sat up. It was a woman. She had on black pants, a heavy down jacket, her makeup was done, and she had a nice purse with a few bottles of water sitting beside her. She didn't look like a hiker or someone camping out. She looked like someone who'd just come from dinner. I asked where she was trying to go. She said her mom was supposed to meet her at a Chevron gas station up the road. My stomach sank a little, because I knew that station was about 7 miles away, and the stretch of highway between here and there was completely dark and empty. She explained she thought it was only about a mile from her hotel and decided to walk. Somewhere along the way, she got too tired and just lay down. We offered her a ride, and she agreed. Before she climbed in, I quietly wrapped a scarf around my neck and kept my pepper spray in reach, just in case this wasn't what it seemed. She slid into the back seat, and we tried to keep the mood light with small talk. I asked her why she had been lying on the ground like that. She admitted she'd reached a point where she didn't think she could keep walking. It was winter. She didn't have gloves or a hat, and the night air had turned sharp and freezing. She sounded completely drained, not just physically, but emotionally too. When we reached the Chevron station, she thanked us and got out, settling onto a bench near the closed storefront. She told us her mom was on her way and insisted we didn't need to wait. I reminded her there was no cell reception in that area, but she just gave me a small smile and said she'd be fine. My husband and I reluctantly left, though I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. Back at our hotel, we noticed 2 police cars parked outside. They hadn't been there earlier. I walked over to one of the officers and asked if they were looking for a missing woman. He said yes, so I explained we had just given someone matching her description a ride to the Chevron. The officer thanked us and said we'd probably done the right thing by helping her get away from wherever she had been. He didn't share much, but I urged him to check on her. He nodded and promised they would. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked the local police logs online. That's when the full picture started to click into place. Apparently, there had been a violent domestic incident at our hotel. A woman had been attacked badly by her husband, and in the chaos, she escaped and called her mom from the front desk before fleeing on foot. With no safe place to go and nowhere to hide, she tried to make it toward that gas station. That explained why she was just lying by the road. She was injured, exhausted, and maybe even convinced she might not make it. It's my belief that the woman we picked up was the same one from that report. The man was arrested, but I never learned what happened to her afterward. I've wondered ever since if she stayed away from him, if her mom actually got to her in time, and if she's safe now. One thing's for sure, my husband never second guesses me anymore when I say, "There's someone on the side of the road." Last week I had one of the scariest moments of my life while driving across the country. A friend of mine needed to get back home to Colorado, and instead of flying, I volunteered to drive him there. I love long drives, and I figured it would be a chance to see parts of the US I'd never really experienced before. The trip from Ohio took us through Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas. 22 hours of open road, not counting food and bathroom breaks. I had never traveled that far by car before. Flying to Florida a couple times was the furthest I had ever gone, so I thought this would be an adventure. Most of the time I was behind the wheel since I actually enjoy driving, and nobody seemed to mind. My friend, Traves, said he could switch if I got tired, but I kept pushing on. After about 12 hours of nonstop driving, I wasn't exactly feeling sleepy, but that's when something happened that shook me up more than I've ever been while traveling. We needed gas, and the station we pulled into was one of those lonely ones you sometimes find in the middle of nowhere. The store itself was closed, so there were no other cars around, no employees, just the humming of the overhead light and the glow from the pump. I was uneasy stepping out, but I didn't think too much of it. I swiped my card, selected the gas, and then got confused for a second because this pump had a weird old setup. I had to mess with a lever before the gas would start flowing, and just as I figured it out, I heard a man's voice off near the dark building. It wasn't loud, just a quick call, something like, "Hey," or "over here." I glanced up immediately, but there was nothing, just shadows and silence. I thought maybe I was imagining things from being tired, so I brushed it off and focused on filling the tank. Halfway through, I heard it again. Same male voice, closer this time. Travs was stretched out in the passenger seat with the seat laid back, and our other friend was curled up asleep in the back. So from the outside, I must have looked like I was alone. I stayed focused on my phone, hoping it was just some random guy passing by and not directed at me. Then I heard whistling. Not a tune, just the kind of sharp, deliberate whistle you use to call for a dog. My stomach sank, and a wave of panic hit me out of nowhere. When I finally looked up, I saw him. A man in a brown hooded coat and bright red shorts stepped out from behind the corner of the building. He looked straight at me and yelled so loud it made me flinch. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." That shout was enough to wake up my friend in the back seat. She immediately sat up and rolled down her window, asking if I was okay. The second her voice carried into the air, the man's whole demeanor changed. He had been walking quickly toward me, but when he realized there were other people in the car, he spun around without hesitation and bolted. I heard a car engine rev, gravel crunch under tires, and then he was gone. I stood there frozen for a few seconds, still gripping the pump. My roommate's timing probably kept something worse from happening, because if she hadn't spoken up, I don't know how close he would have gotten. After I managed to finish filling the tank, I handed over the keys and let her drive. My hands were still shaking too much to hold the wheel. Looking back, I can't stop thinking about how quickly fear erased all the plans I thought I had for handling situations like that. I've read safety tips, told myself I'd know exactly what to do, and pictured being ready to fight back or get away. But the truth is, when it's happening in real time, your body doesn't react the way you think it will. All I could do was freeze. I don't know what that man wanted, and I don't ever want to find out. What I do know is I was lucky that night. Lucky that I wasn't completely alone, and lucky that my roommate's voice scared him off. Back when I was younger, I used to make the same holiday trip every December. My whole extended family would gather at my aunt's house, which was tucked away upstate, and no matter how much I dreaded the long drive, I always ended up going. The road to her place wasn't anything special, just a lonely highway that cut through miles of empty land and farmland. Somewhere along the way it passed near Akron, New York, but most of the drive felt like being swallowed by endless stretches of trees and back roads. One particular year stands out more than any other. I had just come off a draining work shift, barely keeping myself awake, and instead of heading home to sleep, I got in the car to make the overnight drive. My family expected me by morning, and I knew if I skipped out, I'd never hear the end of it. About halfway there, I noticed the gas gauge was hanging dangerously close to empty. That set me off because my brother had sworn he'd filled the tank the day before. Either he lied, or he completely forgot. But either way, I was now in the middle of nowhere with little fuel left. That's when I noticed this old, crooked sign on the side of the road. It wasn't a proper highway sign, more like a piece of sheet metal nailed to a pole with "Gas Next Exit" painted across it. The letters were faded, uneven, and the whole thing looked like it had been sitting there for decades. Still, I didn't have a choice. I pulled off at the next exit and ended up on this cracked 2-lane road that wound through thick woods. Every turn of the wheel made me feel like I was driving deeper into a place I wasn't supposed to be. Eventually, the trees opened up and I saw the gas station. At first glance, I knew I was out of luck. The place had clearly been abandoned for years. The store's roof sagged in the middle like it might collapse at any second. Windows were boarded up, and the lot was overgrown with weeds. The pumps had been torn out, leaving only rusted bases. I cursed under my breath, pulled over anyway, and checked the gauge. There was no chance I'd make it back to the highway on what little I had left, so I called AAA. They told me a truck would come, but it would be a while. I wasn't about to sit in pitch-black darkness next to that ruin, so I kept the engine running and the headlights on. The beams cut across the front of the store and lit up just enough of the lot to keep me on edge. The first 15 minutes or so dragged by without incident, and I was starting to think maybe this would just be a long, boring wait. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement near the store. Something shifted in the light, quick enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I glanced back at my phone, trying not to think too hard about it, until a voice broke through the quiet. A man's voice, sharp and commanding. "Hey buddy, come here." I snapped my head up and saw him. A man was standing at the edge of the building, staring straight at me. He looked rough, dirty clothes, unshaven, the kind of person you might pass by on the street and assume was homeless. My pulse spiked instantly. He wasn't smiling, wasn't waving, just standing stiff in the glow of my headlights, watching. I rolled the window down a crack and called back, trying to sound steady. "What do you need?" His reply was flat. "You got any change?" I shook my head. "Sorry, I don't." Something about the way he stood there bothered me. His expression didn't change. He didn't move closer, didn't move back. He just stared. That's when I picked up on more movement around him, this time farther back in the trees. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark, and realized I wasn't looking at shadows. I was looking at faces. Dozens of them. There must have been 20 people or more peeking out from behind the trees, their heads tilted just enough so their eyes caught the light. None of them moved. None of them said a word. They just stood there, watching me. My stomach dropped. Another figure appeared from behind the gas station, walking into view as if he was about to join the first man. That was it for me. I threw the car into gear and stomped the gas pedal. The engine roared and I tore out of there, pushing the tank to its last fumes. I didn't stop until I was back on the highway, and as soon as I had cell service again, I updated AAA with my new location. When the tow truck finally showed, the driver filled me up and went on his way. I didn't mention what I'd seen, but once I had a little distance from the place, I called the local sheriff's office. I gave them the location and explained what happened. Later that night, when I was safe at my aunt's house, they called me back. They told me there was no one there by the time an officer arrived, but they did find signs of people living out in the woods. Blankets, empty food cans, makeshift bedding. They didn't go into much detail, but it confirmed what I already knew. I hadn't imagined it. There were people out there. A lot of them. I still think about that night whenever I'm driving through rural stretches of road. I don't know what those people wanted, or why they were hiding, but I know one thing for sure. I was lucky to leave that place without something worse happening. A few years back, my friend Tez and I decided to take on the ultimate American road trip. The plan was simple: start in New York, end in LA, and take 6 weeks to zigzag through the country with no strict schedule. We were both broke 20-somethings, so to save money, I pitched the idea of sleeping in the back of my hatchback. My mom had been a long-haul trucker, so I figured I knew a thing or two about living on the road. We grabbed some blankets and sheets from Goodwill, cut some up to make curtains, and after a week, we had our little setup down to an art. We crashed anywhere that felt safe: rest stops, free campsites, parking lots, even the occasional driveway when a friendly stranger offered. And honestly, it was amazing. We met the coolest people. We hitchhiked in the back of a pickup to Denny's with some rowdy campers, partied with an old cowboy who taught us how to line dance, and even spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us. Shout out to Grandma for the weed candy. Every interaction with a stranger was a good one. Until Arizona. We were near Flagstaff when we found a free campsite on Google. It was deep in the woods, pretty far from town, but nothing we hadn't done before. When we pulled up, there were only a couple of cars and an old RV. As we drove past the RV, the door creaked open and a man stepped out. Tez, always friendly, waved at him. The guy just stared at her. No wave, no smile, nothing. Just a blank, unsettling look. Then, without saying a word, he slowly closed the door, still watching us the entire time. We figured he was just some grumpy old dude who wanted his space, so we parked further in, near the trees, and started messing around, taking stupid photos and laughing. Tez spotted a campfire down the way, and in true Tez fashion, she wanted to go make friends. That had been our whole trip, meeting people, sharing beers, swapping stories. No reason this night should be any different, right? At the fire, we met 2 guys, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. The older guy was completely out of it, spinning in circles and rambling about UFOs, but he seemed harmless. The younger one introduced himself as a former park ranger. He was friendly, easygoing, and actually fun to talk to. We spent a while just chatting about life, our travels, random stuff. Then he mentioned the bear. Said he'd seen one earlier, real close to the campsite. Tez didn't believe him, so he pulled out his camera and showed her pictures. The bear was right there. We both got a little uneasy because one of us always had to get up in the middle of the night to pee, and the idea of stumbling into a bear in the dark, not ideal. But then the ranger gave this weird little laugh, and his whole vibe shifted. He looked straight at us and said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I waited for the punchline, the part where he'd smirk, nudge Tez, and say he was just messing with us. He never did. I forced out a chuckle and made a joke about serial killers in the woods. Tez played along, throwing in a Texas Chainsaw reference. But every time we tried to change the subject, he kept bringing it back. He kept talking about people disappearing in the woods, things grabbing people from their cars. It didn't feel like he was just telling spooky stories. It felt like he was trying to warn us. The older guy was too spaced out to notice, just staring at the sky. But Tez and I were getting more uncomfortable by the second. Then the ranger got up, walked over to his cooler outside the fire's glow, and that's when I saw it. A tiny red dot in the darkness. It took me a second to realize what it was. A camera. He was taking pictures of us. Not with us. Not, "Hey, let's take a selfie." He was just silently snapping photos of us like we were some kind of exhibit. He checked the screen, adjusted something, and took another, this time with the flash. Tez and I just sat there, stiff as boards, staring at him. He didn't explain, didn't ask if it was okay. He just came back, sat down, and carried on like nothing had happened. That was it. We were done. We made up some excuse about needing to set up our car for the night, and got the hell out of there. As we stood to leave, the UFO guy smiled and told us to have a good night. The ranger? He just gave us this cold, empty look and said, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in the woods." Every nerve in my body went on high alert. Tez forced out a laugh and yanked me toward the car. The second we were inside, she locked the doors, her breathing all over the place. Why was he taking pictures of us? I was shaking. I had no idea what to say, so the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims." She stared at me, then locked the doors again, like that would somehow help. "Do you think he just took victim photos of us?" That was it. We panicked. She flipped on the headlights, and I immediately shut them off. For some reason, this was the only night we hadn't fully set up camp. Nothing to pack, nothing to take down. We threw the car in drive and floored it. As we hit the dirt road, I caught one last glimpse of the ranger in the rearview mirror. He was walking toward our car, and he wasn't smiling anymore. A little while back, my wife and I were on a road trip up into the mountains. It was one of those long travel days where the hours start blending together, and by the time we neared our hotel, we were running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. We decided to stop for food before the final stretch and found a restaurant in a small town off the highway. Or at least, we thought it was a small town. Turns out, it was more of a busy truck stop than a quiet roadside diner kind of place. But at that point, we were too hungry to care. Getting off the highway, though, a nightmare. The traffic layout made absolutely no sense. Picture a regular highway exit, but then slap on extra lights, weird merge lanes, and random turns that seemed to go nowhere. I was already drained from driving all day, and trying to make sense of this mess was not helping. Somewhere in the confusion, I accidentally cut someone off. I heard a long, angry honk from behind, and my wife, ever observant, informed me, "Yeah, you totally just cut that guy off." I felt bad, sure. It was an honest mistake, but apparently, he wasn't ready to let it go. As we continued up the hill toward the restaurant, I noticed a massive pickup truck pulling onto the road behind us, and something about the way it moved sent a chill down my spine. I don't know how to describe it, but I knew he was following us. Trying not to jump to conclusions, I pulled into the restaurant's parking lot and coasted toward the back, just to see if he'd do the same. Sure enough, he turned in too, but it looked like he lost sight of us in the crowded lot. I muttered, "He's following us," and my wife, without hesitation, said, "Yeah, that's awkward. Let's go somewhere else." That was all I needed to hear. We circled around behind the building, slowly, giving him a chance to park or just move along. Then, as I turned back toward the exit, my stomach clenched. He was waiting at the entrance. Not parked, not pulling into a spot, just sitting there, watching the lot. Then, suddenly, his truck lurched forward, barreling straight toward us. I barely had time to react before he angled his truck across our lane, cutting us off. He was blocking us in. As he did, his window rolled down, and this rough-looking guy, older, tattoos, wearing a ratty tank top, leaned out, stretching his arm toward my car like he was about to grab it. And then he screamed at me, "Stop your car!" Yeah, that wasn't happening. Everything in me was screaming, "Do not stop." So I yelled, "Nope!" cranked the wheel, and floored it, squeezing past him with barely an inch to spare. I was hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. I flew down the hill toward the main road, but there was a red light and too many cars to make a quick getaway. Thinking fast, I veered into a gas station at the bottom of the hill. And wouldn't you know it, he followed me there too. That was it. I wasn't playing this game anymore. I whipped the car around and shot back up the hill, dialing 911 as I went. The operator was calm and reassuring as I explained that some road rage maniac was following us and trying to block us in. I told her I was ready to drive straight to the nearest police station, but just as I was giving her details, I noticed something. He was gone. I stayed on the line a little longer, just to be sure, then took a different road out of town. My wife and I were completely rattled. There was no way we were stopping for food now. We just drove straight to the hotel, constantly checking our mirrors the whole way. And the weirdest part? Even after we thought we'd shaken him, we still saw his truck on the road ahead of us later that night. We doubled back, took another route, and didn't stop for anything. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we had barely dodged something a lot worse than an angry driver. Back when I was a freshman in college, I decided to take a brilliant idea and run with it. Drive down to Mexico with my roommate Ryan and our girlfriends for some real Mexican food and a little adventure. This was around 2005, and while places like Juarez had a bad reputation, we'd heard Progreso was totally fine to visit. So naturally we figured, why not? The four of us packed into my car and made the 3-hour drive from Corpus Christi late on a Sunday night. Looking back, that was probably our first mistake. We were two clean-cut college guys with blonde-haired, blue-eyed girlfriends, which, in hindsight, made us stick out like a sore thumb. When we got to the border, there was a parking lot where you could leave your car and just walk across. No passport needed, just a driver's license. Seemed easy enough. But as we handed our IDs to the border agent, he gave us this look. You know, the kind a parent gives when they know you're about to do something really dumb, but decide to let you learn the hard way. He sighed and asked what we planned to do. We told him we just wanted food, drinks, and to check out the area. He paused, nodded slowly, and said, "Please be very, very careful." I felt a weird pang of unease, but I brushed it off. It's Mexico, I told myself. We'll be fine. The moment we stepped off the bridge and into Progreso, though, it was like walking into another world. The streets were dimly lit, some not even paved, with people loitering in the shadows or selling random stuff on the sidewalks. We hadn't made it more than 100 yards before a stranger locked onto us. This guy, probably late 30s, stocky, muscular, had a heavy Spanish accent, but could speak broken English. And he was way too friendly. The kind of friendly that instantly makes you suspicious. He started chatting us up like we were his long-lost best friends, insisting he knew the best bars, the best restaurants, the best everything. Right away, I didn't like him. There was something off. But the others didn't seem as concerned, so I tried to shake it off. He followed us to a restaurant, still talking our ears off, and even sat down with us like we had invited him. The dude dominated the conversation the whole meal, pushing more and more for us to let him show us around town. By the time we paid the bill, even Ryan and the girls were getting uncomfortable. Then, just as he left for the restroom, the waitress walked over. She leaned in, looked at us seriously, and whispered in broken English, "That man. No good man. Muy malo. No good." Instant chills. We didn't need any more convincing. We grabbed our stuff and hurried toward the door, hoping to slip away before he came back. But just as we stepped outside, bam! He was right there, waiting for us. His whole vibe had shifted. No more fake friendly chatter. He looked pissed. He snapped at us to follow him to the best bar in town. We hesitated, but fear can make you do dumb things. And somehow, we found ourselves trailing behind him down the main street. Every few minutes, he'd dart across the road and mutter something to a group of police standing on the corner. Except, they didn't look like real cops. They wore baggy clothes, had pistols tucked into their waistbands, and stood around smoking cigarettes, watching us. The whole street felt like it had slowed down. People stopped and stared as we passed, like they knew something was up. And then, the guy did something that completely sent me over the edge. He pulled out a cigarette, put it in his mouth, and started pretending to smoke it. He never lit it, just kept puffing away like it was totally normal. That was it. We needed to get out. Now. I was mentally keeping track of how far we'd walked from the border, and the bridge lights were getting smaller and smaller. Then we turned onto a side street, and at the end of it, I saw a van parked alone in an empty lot. The guy motioned toward it and said the bar was just a little farther. Nope. Absolutely not. I stopped walking and said, "Nah, we're done. We're going back." The others looked at me, and I could see the fear in their faces. I turned and started walking, and the second we did, the guy's whole demeanor darkened. He started shouting after us, demanding we follow him. We ignored him and walked faster. He kept yelling. Then we were running. We sprinted all the way back to the border, and right before the bridge, he finally stopped chasing us. He just disappeared into the dark streets, like he knew he'd lost his chance. Once we were near the border agents, we didn't look back. That night, as we drove home, we kept laughing nervously, trying to shake off the adrenaline. But we all knew. We had just dodged something really, really bad. Back in the summer of 2006, I had just gotten my driver's license earlier that year, and let me tell you, I was making up for lost time. Every chance I got, I was hopping in my car and taking solo road trips to visit friends all over New England and the Mid-Atlantic. Being 20 but looking more like a high schooler had its drawbacks, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That July, I was heading to southern Pennsylvania to spend a long weekend at my friend's house, while her parents were out of town. We had grand plans, hot tubbing, drinking, watching Planet Earth while drunk, because that had just come out, and maybe some late-night running through cornfields. It was shaping up to be a perfect summer trip. The drive was smooth, the weather was gorgeous, and my playlist was hitting just right. As soon as I crossed from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I decided to stop at one of the first rest areas for gas and snacks. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but it had a gas station with a big convenience store. Across from it was the highway on-ramp, and running parallel to that was this sketchy dirt road. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. As I was heading inside to grab some snacks, a man walked up to me. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, stocky, a little tall, wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans, with dark brown hair and a goatee. His truck, a black pickup, was parked just a few spaces from mine. Something about him immediately felt off. His stare was too intense, like he was sizing me up, and he stood way too close for comfort. I don't usually pick up on bad vibes from people, but this guy had me on edge instantly. Then he started talking. First, he asked if I was from the area, which made no sense because my car had Connecticut plates. Then he wanted to know where I was going, and, weirdly, if I knew of anything fun to do, because he had time to kill before some plans later. Before I could even process how bizarre that was, he straight up invited me to go play mini golf or see a movie with him. Who does that? I just shook my head, mumbled something about not knowing the area, and quickly walked toward the store. And that's when things got even creepier. As I turned to leave, he suddenly yelled, "You're gorgeous!" loud enough to startle an entire family walking out of the store. His voice was aggressive, way too forceful, and sent this horrible chill through me. I didn't look back. I just kept walking and ducked into the store. A few minutes later, I saw him come inside, but he wasn't shopping. He was just watching me. That was enough for me. I went straight to the bathroom and stayed there for at least 10 minutes, texting my friend about the creep lurking around. When I finally came out, he was gone, and I felt a rush of relief. His truck was nowhere in sight, so I figured I was in the clear. I took my time grabbing snacks, because, let's be real, road trips require sour bright crawlers and trail mix. Then went out to fill up my gas tank. That relief didn't last long. As I pulled up to the road leading back to the highway, I suddenly heard honking, persistent, loud, like someone really wanted my attention. I looked over, and there he was, sitting in his truck on that dirt road parallel to the highway ramp, waving me down and shouting. My stomach twisted into knots. He had been waiting for me, watching. That was it. I floored it onto the highway. Within seconds, I saw his truck pull onto the road behind me. My hands were shaking as I called my friend, barely able to get the words out. She stayed on the phone, trying to keep me calm while I sped down I-78, doing everything I could to put distance between us. I don't know how long he followed me, but after a few exits, his truck finally disappeared. My friend and I had already come up with a backup plan. If I saw him again, I wouldn't go straight to her house. I'd head to the nearest police station instead. Thankfully, I never spotted his truck again. But for the rest of that drive, I was tense, checking my mirrors constantly, my heart pounding every time I saw another black pickup. I made it to my friend's house safely, and we had a great weekend. But the whole thing left me shaken. Over the years, I didn't think much about it. It was just one of those creepy encounters you file away in your brain. Then, in 2014, I casually mentioned the story to a friend who's really into true crime. She got curious and started looking up serial killers who were active in Pennsylvania around that time. The first name that popped up? Adam Leroy Lane. And when we pulled up a picture of him, my heart nearly stopped. He looked so much like the man I had met at that gas station. Same general build, same hair, same facial hair. The only difference was that in my memory, the guy seemed slightly slimmer. Now, I'll never know for sure if it was actually him, but the timing and the area matched up eerily well. Lane was convicted of murdering multiple women, and he was known for targeting strangers at random. If that really was him, I might have had one of the closest calls of my life. A couple of summers ago, I took my son on a day trip to celebrate his birthday. We went to a water park, had a blast, and after getting a little lost thanks to Google Maps' amazing navigation skills, we ended up stopping in this small town for dinner. The place was tiny, barely more than a few streets, but dinner was good, and just as we were about to head out, we spotted a county fair across the street. It looked like fun, so we figured, why not? The fair was winding down for the night, but a tractor pull was about to start, and since none of us had ever seen one, we thought it'd be a fun way to cap off the day. It was the kind of scene you'd expect: families, locals, and a handful of drunk people being loud, but nothing that felt unsafe. I wasn't worried at all. I had my 16-year-old son with me, and a good friend who's built like a tank, so if anything weird did happen, I knew we could handle it. But after a while, we decided to head out before the roads filled up with drunk drivers. We walked back to the restaurant where we'd parked, which was now closed for the night, got in my car, and set off for home. That's when things got strange. The second we pulled out of the lot, I noticed another car behind us. Nothing unusual at first. It was a small town. Maybe they were headed the same way. But as we got onto this dark, winding back road leading to the interstate, I realized we were the only two cars out there. That's when I started paying attention. The road was completely deserted, just trees and hills on either side, no houses, no streetlights, just us, and this car that seemed to be sticking way too close. I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were from out of town like us, just taking the same shortcut to the interstate. Still, I felt uneasy. As I drove, I kept my speed steady, being careful because it was dark, and I didn't want a deer jumping out in front of us. But then, I noticed something. This guy wasn't just following me, he was tailgating me. I slowed down, hoping he'd just pass and be on his way. Instead, he did the opposite, got even closer. I could see there was only one person in the car, and the windows were tinted so dark I couldn't make out his face. My nerves kicked up a notch. I sped up, thinking maybe he'd back off if I put some distance between us. Nope. He stayed right there, matching my speed exactly. At this point, it was obvious. This wasn't some coincidence. He was messing with us. I started feeling real fear now. My son was in the back seat, on his birthday, and now we were being stalked down some deserted country road in the middle of nowhere. I cursed myself for even stopping at that tractor pull. But how could I have predicted this? I just needed to get to the interstate. Maybe once we were on a busy road, he'd give up. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't be that easy. We finally hit the highway, and I prayed that this was where he'd break off. But no. He followed us right onto the interstate, still hugging my bumper. At first, I slowed down, giving him every chance to pass. He didn't. I sped up. He did too. The road was mostly empty, which made it even worse. I had nowhere to go. My friend, sitting in the passenger seat, was furious, ready to jump out and fight this guy if it came to that. But I had no interest in stopping, not with my kid in the car. I just needed to keep moving. Then I had an idea. I laid on my horn, hard, long enough that anyone in the area, if there even was anyone, would hear it. The second I did, the guy suddenly pulled over onto the shoulder and turned off his headlights. That sent a chill through me. Who does that? I didn't waste time trying to figure it out. I pushed my foot down on the gas, determined to put as much distance between us as possible. After about 15 minutes of silence, I started to relax a little. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe it really was just some local idiot trying to scare us for fun. We even started laughing a little, talking about how crazy that whole situation had been. But just when we thought it was over, headlights exploded on right next to us. I nearly screamed. The guy had been there the entire time, trailing us with his lights off so we wouldn't see him. He had waited, lurking in the dark, just so he could pull this stunt. I wasn't scared anymore. I was pissed. He had been following us for an hour now. This was no prank. Far up ahead, I spotted the taillights of a semi. I knew what I had to do. I gunned it, trying to catch up, knowing that if I could just get close to another vehicle, I wouldn't feel so alone out here. The guy must have realized what I was doing, because that's when he tried something new. He swerved at my rear panel, like he was trying to run me off the road. My heart pounded as I dodged him by inches. I wasn't playing games anymore. I pushed my car faster, finally catching up to the semi, sticking as close as I could to its bumper so there was no room for the guy to cut me off. And then something amazing happened. The trucker must have realized what was happening, because out of nowhere, he swerved hard into the left lane, cutting the guy off completely, and then tapping his brakes just enough to slow him down. That was my moment. I floored it, speeding past both of them, putting as much distance between me and that psycho as possible. I didn't stop until I was nearly home. I pulled into a well-lit gas station, and by some miracle, there was a cop sitting there. My friend jumped out and told him everything. The officer immediately called for backup to look for the guy. We didn't go straight home that night. I left my car in a different parking lot just in case, not wanting to risk him seeing where I lived. For weeks I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at the sight of any car that looked remotely like his. And here's the part that still gives me chills. This all happened in a town that's home to one of the biggest mental health asylums in the Midwest. Every now and then, I checked the news, just to see if there were any reports of escapees around that time. I've never found anything. But the thought that he could have been someone from there, that's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night. Back in 2010, I made the bold decision to move from New Orleans all the way up to Eugene, Oregon. I was 24 at the time, just me and my 2-year-old pit bull, crammed into this clunky 14-foot U-Haul filled with everything I owned. This was before I had a smartphone, just a basic flip phone with no GPS and a thick stack of printed MapQuest directions in the passenger seat. It wasn't exactly the best setup for navigating unfamiliar roads, especially since cell service vanished completely in parts of the desert for what felt like entire lifetimes. Still, I was excited and determined to make this cross-country trip on my own terms. Somewhere deep in central Texas, I realized I had made a bit of a miscalculation. My gas gauge was flirting with empty, and I hadn't seen another town, exit, or even a gas station for ages. Just as I was starting to panic and question my life decisions, this tiny little town popped up out of nowhere like a mirage. I didn't catch the name of it because I was too focused on getting to the pump before my truck sputtered out. It was one of those blink and you miss it places, maybe 6 streets total, barely any signs, and quiet in a way that didn't feel entirely normal. I filled up at the pump, never even went inside the building, and figured I'd be back on the highway in no time. Except, I couldn't find the way back to the highway. And I don't mean like I got turned around once or twice. I circled that entire town 4 times, each lap making me more irritated and confused. I could literally see the highway from certain spots in town, but every road I took either looped me back or dead-ended. Finally, I gave up and went into the gas station to ask someone, and that's when I met this lanky guy behind the counter. He had long, greasy black hair hanging in front of his face, and barely looked up from the magazine he was flipping through. He wasn't outwardly creepy, but something about him was just off. He spoke like I was wasting his time and gave me directions that made 0 sense. He told me to take some road that would get me back to the highway, but only after driving 17 miles out of town. I paused and said, "Wait, how is it 17 miles back? I didn't even drive that far to get here." But he just shrugged, mumbled something about the road curving around, still not looking me in the eye. I left that store with my gut in absolute knots. The second I hit the parking lot, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition, and the moment I sat down in the truck, I just started crying. There wasn't any one thing that guy had done that screamed danger, but everything in me knew something was wrong. Whatever he wanted, whether it was the stuff in the back of my truck or maybe something worse, I had no intention of finding out. The only problem was, he was the only person I'd seen in that town, and I had no idea how else I was going to get proper directions. That's when this beat-up red pickup rolled up to the station. The thing looked like it had been through several apocalypses, but the guy who stepped out was the living embodiment of a Texas stereotype. Big, broad flannel shirt, work boots, beard. I didn't hesitate. I ran up to him and asked if he knew how to get back to the highway, and maybe it was the desperation on my face, or the fact that I was near tears, but he immediately gave me a kind smile and said he could help. He told me there was a tricky little turnoff hidden just past a short concrete tunnel, a spot I'd passed a few times without noticing. Apparently, it tripped up travelers all the time because there were no proper signs, and it blended into the landscape. Then I asked him, "Out of curiosity, how far is it back to the highway?" He chuckled and said, "Oh, maybe a quarter mile. See, you can almost spot it from here." My stomach dropped, so I told him the directions that the guy at the station had given me, and his whole face changed. He stared at me for a second, and then quietly asked how I even knew about that route. I told him the clerk gave it to me. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if I had a proper map. Unfortunately, I only had MapQuest printouts, which weren't helpful in this weird little place. He went back to his truck, pulled out a weathered old map of the area, and spread it out on the hood. He traced the route I'd been given, and sure enough, it veered away from the town, leading deep into nowhere. He told me that road led about 17 miles into the desert and just ended. Nothing there except a scattering of trailers, rusted-out cars, and a small group of sketchy families who were known in the area for drug problems, and worse. That gas station guy? Apparently he lived out there. I'll never forget the way Texas, yeah, that's what I call him in my head, looked at me when he said I'd been smart to trust my instincts and not go down that road. To this day, I don't know exactly what that man's intentions were, but I know they weren't good. I was just a young woman alone with a truck full of stuff and no cell signal, and it still chills me to think how easily that story could have ended differently. But instead, I got lucky. I met a kind stranger with a rusty truck and a warm heart who helped me find my way. I never got his name, but I'll always remember him as Texas, my roadside angel in flannel. This happened quite a few years back, maybe when I was around 20 or so. One of my best friends had invited me to tag along with his family on a little road trip that ended with a concert just across the border. The plan was pretty laid back: drive during the day, then pull into campsites at night and crash in their camper van. Nothing fancy, just good company, music, and a break from the usual routine. Our first night on the road, we hadn't even crossed the border yet when we rolled into a cozy little campground that sat right next to a beach. It had that calm, family vacation kind of vibe. RVs parked in neat rows, kids running around earlier in the day, and not a sketchy soul in sight. So naturally, we all let our guard down without thinking twice about it. After dinner, while everyone was settling in for bed, I decided to step out for some air and clear my head. I've always loved being near the water, and since the camper was basically parked right next to the shoreline, I figured a quick walk wouldn't hurt. As I strolled down toward the beach, I passed this old wooden shack, one of those little storage buildings you see near the water. Didn't think anything of it at the time, just made a mental note of it in case I needed a landmark on the way back. I kicked off my shoes, stood where the waves could wash over my feet, and let myself zone out for a bit under the moonlight. Off in the distance, I saw a guy standing further down the beach. It was a public spot, so I didn't think much of it. Probably another camper out enjoying the quiet like me. Eventually, I figured it was time to head back, and that's when things started to feel off. That man who had been standing on the beach earlier? Gone. But the weird part was when I got closer to the shack again. I could swear I saw someone trying to duck behind it, like they didn't want me to notice them. Instantly, my brain kicked into high alert. I didn't want to panic, but I also wasn't about to pretend everything was fine. I quickly called a friend I knew would be awake and started talking really loudly, dropping hints like, "Yeah, I see you. I'll meet you near the camper in 5." I gave that shack a huge amount of space as I kept walking, making sure whoever was there knew I wasn't clueless or alone. I made it back safely, locked the camper door behind me, and climbed into bed trying to shake off the unease. I didn't say anything to my friend or his family because, honestly, I figured it could have been something harmless. Maybe a drunk tourist. Maybe someone just being weird. Either way, I pushed it out of my mind and enjoyed the rest of the trip like nothing happened. Fast forward about a year later, I was hanging out with that same friend, reminiscing about the trip, when that weird beach moment suddenly popped into my head. I casually brought it up, kind of laughing about how creeped out I'd been. But as I was talking, I noticed he got really quiet. Then he told me something I hadn't heard before. Apparently, a few months after the trip, his younger brother had mentioned something strange at breakfast one day. The same night I came back from the beach, his brother had woken up in the middle of the night to grab some water. As he passed by the camper's window, he saw a man standing right outside, staring in. The guy bolted as soon as he realized he'd been seen, but it definitely freaked him out. We both sat there in silence for a bit, realizing how much worse that night could have turned out. Whoever was hiding near the beach shack might have actually followed me back to the camper. I still don't know what he wanted, and honestly, I don't want to know. But it makes me really grateful I trusted my gut and didn't go back quietly that night. I think about it more than I'd like to admit. So this happened a couple summers back when my boyfriend and I were heading home after a weekend camping trip, deep in the backcountry of British Columbia. We were on one of those long, bumpy forestry roads, like an hour or so from any paved highway, and since we'd camped out there plenty of times before, we knew the area pretty well. Usually the only people you run into that far out are either other campers in lifted trucks or guys driving logging rigs. It was a gorgeous day. Clear skies, warm air, that perfect summer afternoon glow, and we were just cruising along when we spotted this guy suddenly stepping out of the trees ahead of us and waving us down like it was an emergency. That instantly caught us off guard, because it's not every day you see someone appear from the woods in the middle of nowhere without any sign of a vehicle. We slowed the truck and came to a stop as my boyfriend rolled down the window to see what this guy wanted. He looked off. He had on this thick flannel work jacket, which made no sense considering how warm it was, plus these dusty tan pants and beat-up boots. He had kind of wild, unkempt hair, big old glasses, and this pale, kind of gaunt face. He looked like someone you'd expect to see fixing a fence post, not walking out of the woods like a ghost. He told us his car battery had died and asked if we could give him a jump. On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable request, but the way he spoke, it was slow and too calm, almost like he was reading a script, definitely made both of us uneasy. Still, we try to be decent people, especially that far out where help is hard to come by, so we said we'd help. He mentioned his car was just a bit further up, down this side trail that was completely overgrown. As he started walking ahead, we followed behind in the truck, kind of joking to each other that this could totally be the start of a horror movie. But under the humor, we both were actually on edge. After maybe 150 meters down this tight, brush-covered path, we rolled into a small clearing we never would have seen if he hadn't shown us. Sure enough, there was a dusty old beige sedan parked there, way too delicate looking for those rough roads. with the trunk open and a blanket kind of tossed over the back like it was hiding something. The hood was already up, which was weird, but my boyfriend got out and grabbed the jumper cables while I quietly slid into the driver's seat, just in case. I didn't want to overreact, but something about the whole setup felt wrong. I even glanced around for anything I could grab as a weapon if I needed to. The guy kept talking to my boyfriend in this awkward, forced friendly tone, mentioning some buddy who had supposedly been fishing with him, but took off earlier, which didn't make a ton of sense. He just stood there while my boyfriend did all the work, like he was waiting for something. Eventually, my boyfriend had to remind him to get in his car and turn the key, which he did, and yeah, the engine started. He hopped back out and thanked us, but his tone was oddly intense, like he was trying really hard to act normal, but not quite pulling it off. My boyfriend didn't even bother properly putting the cables away. He just got in the truck, and as soon as he shut the door, I threw it in reverse and backed the heck out of there, with branches scraping along both sides of the truck. When we got back to the main road, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. As we drove away, my boyfriend told me the guy had just stood there, silently watching us the entire time as we backed out. And sure, maybe he was just a weird dude with a dead battery and some social awkwardness, but neither of us saw any fishing gear near the car, and the whole thing felt too strange to be just a coincidence. I still get that pit in the stomach feeling when I think about how isolated that spot was. I honestly think the only reason nothing bad happened was because we both stayed sharp and didn't give him the chance to catch us off guard. Sometimes trusting your gut makes all the difference. This happened to me back in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the whole pandemic craziness. My buddy, let's just call him Jay, and I were making a road trip from New York to Michigan to take care of some flooring jobs and maybe check out a couple houses we were thinking of flipping. We had loaded up his work truck, a sturdy Ford F-150, and decided we'd hit the road at night to beat the traffic and get there by morning. We were driving through Pennsylvania, and if you've ever been on those winding mountain highways out there, especially I-80, you know it's no joke. Just endless curves, narrow lanes, and steep drop-offs if you mess up. I was the one driving while Jay tried to get some sleep, and around midnight or so, I pulled into a service plaza to fill up and grab a few snacks. There weren't many people around, just one other car a few pumps over, a reddish SUV, maybe a Suzuki or something close. I didn't pay much attention, just noticed it, and moved on. Fast forward about 30 minutes, and I'm back on the highway doing a solid 90 in the left lane when I see headlights creeping up behind us. At first, I didn't think twice about it, but after a few minutes, I realized it was the same SUV from the gas station, and something about that started to bother me. To test a hunch, I slowed down to around 70, expecting the SUV to pass, but instead, it dropped speed right along with me. That's when I nudged Jay awake and told him I thought we were being followed. He perked up immediately. This guy used to be in the army, so he's wired to pick up on shady behavior fast. Without missing a beat, he says, "Yeah, I saw that guy at the gas station too. He gave you a weird look when you walked by him." Jay tells me to switch lanes, so I do, and the SUV switches right with me. Then he says, "All right, pull over. Let's see what he does." So I slow to a crawl and roll onto the shoulder. Sure enough, the guy actually stops behind us. At that point, Jay is like, "Yeah, this dude's got a gun or something. He's way too bold for this to be nothing." Jay tells me to punch it and go, and as I'm accelerating, he's rummaging through the cab, grabbing whatever could be used as a weapon. Hatchet, machete, a couple pocket knives. Nothing too crazy, but enough to put up a fight if it came down to it. Jay had this idea. He wanted me to brake check the guy, make him crash, and then we'd jump out with the blades and confront him. But honestly, the guy hadn't made a move yet, and I wasn't ready to escalate unless we had to. Instead, Jay grabs a big handheld spotlight from the back of the truck and opens the rear window. He aims it at the SUV and flips it on. We were hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver, but the front windows were tinted way too dark to see through. I swerved lanes and told Jay to hit him with the light again from the side. That time, for just a few seconds, we got a full look, and it was enough to give me chills. The guy looked off. He was tall, hunched over the wheel, had this weird, gaunt face that reminded me of Uncle Fester from the Addams Family, but with wild hair kind of like Kramer from Seinfeld. His expression was intense, like he was completely locked in on us. But once he realized we were both alert, that we saw his face, and that we weren't easy targets, he suddenly veered off at the next truck stop and disappeared. To this day, Jay and I still argue about what we should have done. He thinks the guy was a full-blown killer, maybe just cruising around looking for someone alone to pick off. Could have been a trucker sleeping in his cab who ended up being the unlucky one that night. Personally, I don't know exactly what that guy had planned, but I'm 100% sure it wasn't good. Whether it was robbery or worse, I'm just thankful we didn't stick around long enough to find out. A few years back, maybe 8 or 9 now, 2 of my close friends and I thought it'd be fun, and cheap, to take a Greyhound road trip from New York to New Orleans, just making stops in different cities along the way. We weren't rolling in money, so the plan was simple: ride the bus, crash at budget hotels, explore a bit, then hop on to the next spot. It sounded like an adventure, and for the most part, it was, until we hit Atlanta. That's when the trip suddenly stopped feeling like a vacation and started feeling like the beginning of a true crime documentary. We got to Atlanta late, probably around midnight, and after checking our maps, we saw that our hotel was only a few blocks away from the station. In our heads, that meant walking would be no big deal, and we didn't want to waste cash on a cab. Classic mistake. A driver near the entrance offered us a ride, but something about him was wrong, so we politely declined and set off on foot, 3 clearly out-of-place guys dragging rolling suitcases through a rough part of town, like we were asking to be robbed. Barely a minute into the walk, this woman who looked strung out started following us, talking fast and asking for money, offering a good time if we went with her. We tried brushing her off and sped up, but the situation just kept getting sketchier. A few steps later, we noticed 3 guys wearing bandanas trailing us, not saying anything, just staying behind us at a steady distance. We stopped to adjust our luggage, and so did they. That was the moment my stomach tightened. We were being hunted, plain and simple. Right as things were escalating, the woman came back even more aggressive, still pushing the same weird deal. Thankfully, a massive bouncer from a nearby strip club saw the situation unfold and shouted at her to back off. Another guy, who clearly knew her, stepped in to argue with the bouncer, and things started to get loud. In the chaos, a security officer from the bus station must have caught sight of us because he came over and basically told us, "What the hell were you thinking walking around here at night?" He pointed out how we looked like walking targets, and yeah, he wasn't wrong. The security guy walked us back toward the station and told us to take a cab this time, no exceptions. The only problem? The same cab driver we had originally turned down was still parked out front, and the officer told him to take us. The second we got in the car, that uneasy feeling came rushing back. He took a weird route, hit the gas hard, and started mumbling to himself under his breath like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. We noticed he locked all the doors with a button on the dash and weren't sure if we were being kidnapped or just driven around by someone unhinged. We told him a couple of times that the hotel was in the other direction, but he ignored us. When he finally pulled up to the hotel, he stopped and just stared straight ahead for a moment, breathing hard. Then, without looking at us, he said in this calm but creepy voice, "Why didn't you get in the car earlier? Something wrong with the way I look?" It was clear he was pissed we rejected his offer at first. We tried to explain we just thought the walk would be quicker and didn't know the area well. We paid the fare, gave him a decent tip just to avoid any drama, and practically sprinted to the hotel doors. But before we made it inside, I turned back, and there he was, standing outside his car, just staring at us like we owed him something. No words, no movement, just that cold stare. Inside the hotel, things didn't get better. It was sketchy. We barricaded the door, and none of us slept more than an hour. We switched hotels the very next morning and agreed that no matter where we go in the future, if it involves Atlanta or Greyhound, it's a hard pass from all of us. Back in early 2016, I was 23 and living in this quiet little spot up in northern New Mexico. That weekend, I'd driven solo up to Boulder, Colorado to see a friend and unwind a bit. It's a long drive, but I'd done it a bunch of times before, so the distance didn't bother me much. Plus, the desert landscape always made for a scenic ride. Things were smooth the whole way back until I stopped in a town called Alamosa to grab gas. That's the last real town before you're back in no man's land for almost 90 miles, with nothing around but dirt roads, scattered trailers, and high desert terrain. It was just getting dark when I pulled out of the gas station, and almost immediately, I noticed this older blue sedan pull out too and end up behind me on the highway. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few minutes I realized they were riding way too close for comfort. I figured maybe they were in a hurry and would pass me soon, but they didn't. I sped up a bit, and so did they. I slowed down, and they slowed down. It was creepy how perfectly in sync they were with my speed, and for a second, I wondered if it might be a cop waiting to catch me slipping. So I decided to pull off at this little convenience store in Antonito, thinking, okay, if it's a cop, they'll stop and talk to me now. The car pulled over too, parked right behind me, but nobody got out. I sat there, completely still, trying to act like I wasn't about to have a panic attack. After a few minutes of silence and no movement from them, I decided to hit the road again, hoping maybe they'd get bored. But nope. They pulled out right behind me, still tailing me like it was a game. I had about an hour left to go, and the highway was just getting darker and lonelier. By the time I crossed into New Mexico, any hope I had that this was just some harmless misunderstanding was gone. My gut told me loud and clear, this was not okay. The worst part? My phone was practically useless. It was one of those older iPhones that only worked when connected to Wi-Fi, and I was deep in an area known for being sketchy, especially out on the Taos Mesa. People talk about weird stuff happening out there. Lights in the sky, people going missing, you name it. And now I was being followed through it, with no way to call for help. I was so shaken up that I totally missed the turn that led to the long dirt road home. Luckily, I remembered this little scenic rest area off the highway that was usually lit up and had a few people around, so I pulled in, hoping this car would either keep driving or finally stop. And of course, they pulled in right behind me. At this point, I was scared, but also seriously pissed, so I decided to just walk up to the driver and figure out what the hell was going on. And when the window rolled down, I was totally thrown. Behind the wheel was this average-looking middle-aged woman. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't that. I asked her why she'd been following me for nearly 90 miles, and she gave me this weird excuse about thinking I was her daughter. I just stared at her like, lady what? My car had plates from a different state, was covered in bright, weird bumper stickers, and looked nothing like something you'd mistake for your kids. Also, wouldn't you call your daughter if you were really that confused? None of it made sense, and honestly, the more she talked, the creepier it felt. I chewed her out and drove off again, thinking that would finally be the end of it. But when I turned off onto the dirt road that leads to my house, she turned in too. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, and told her very clearly that this wasn't a public road. There was no other way out, and it was dangerous to get lost out here in the dark. She just kept apologizing in that same soft tone, but when I got back in my car and started driving again, she kept following me. I was so close to home at that point, and I just kept hoping my boyfriend would be there. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, she pulled in too, parked, and got out of her car. She started walking toward me, asking if she could crash at our place for the night, because she was too tired to keep driving. I started yelling at her to leave, and right as the noise picked up, my boyfriend came out onto the porch. The second she saw him, she stopped in her tracks, turned around, and basically sprinted back to her car. She took off without saying another word, and we never saw her again. To this day, I have no idea what her real motive was, or if someone else was hiding in the back seat of that car. I just know she followed me for nearly 90 miles through isolated roads, lied straight to my face, and only bailed when another adult showed up. Whatever she was up to, it wasn't good. Alright, so this happened not too long ago. April 4th, 2022 to be exact. My friend and I had just finished up an amazing night in Columbus, Ohio after seeing Matt Maltese live, and we were heading back home to Kentucky. About 20 or 30 minutes into the drive, we realized we hadn't eaten much since earlier in the evening, so we pulled off the highway to stop at this random gas station, grab some snacks, and hit the restroom. Everything was pretty standard: chips, drinks, a bathroom break, and we got back in the car ready to just zone out and drive home. But when I looked down at my GPS, I noticed it had changed our route from the usual interstate to some back highway I didn't recognize. Now, it was already around midnight, and we were both wiped, so I didn't question it too much. I figured maybe there was traffic or an accident, and I just wanted to get home. As soon as we turned onto the new route, though, things started to feel off. There were no streetlights, no other cars, no businesses or houses, just open fields as far as you could see. The gas station we just left seemed to be the last trace of civilization, and even the road ahead looked like something out of a horror movie. After about 5 or 6 miles of driving through this eerie emptiness, the GPS told me to make a right onto some tiny road that barely looked like it was used. No painted lines, no street name signs, and just a couple of scattered houses along the way, though none of them looked like anyone had lived in them for years. The vibes were seriously off. I made a joke to my friend, something like, "This feels like where you'd run into an SW," using just the abbreviation. "If you know, you know." He immediately shot back with, "Dude, don't even say that," and laughed. But it didn't really ease the tension. Then the GPS announced there was a railroad crossing coming up, so I started watching for the tracks. But we didn't see them until they were literally right in front of us. Just rusty metal and graffiti-covered train cars sitting there in complete silence. There were no flashing lights, no gate arms, not even a single sound. The thing looked abandoned, like it hadn't moved in years. My headlights barely lit it up, but the little I saw was enough to make both of us freeze. That's when my friend said my name really quietly, like he was trying not to freak me out. But we were already both freaking out. It felt like we weren't supposed to be there, like we had slipped into a place that wasn't real. There was no way to go forward, and there definitely wasn't a path around. So I threw the car in reverse, spun around through the grass, and floored it back down the highway, doing like 80 until we reached the gas station we'd stopped at earlier. Once we got there and finally started to breathe again, we just sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what just happened. We pulled up the GPS again and, just like that, it rerouted back to the interstate, like nothing ever happened. No sign of that sketchy back road, no mention of a railroad crossing, no reason for why we were ever taken that way. And the thing is, that train wasn't just broken down recently. The wheels were corroded. The whole thing looked like it had been rusting in that spot for years. Why would the GPS send us to a dead end like that? The more I think about it, the more it messes with me. From the second we left that gas station to the moment we came back, it all felt fake. Like we weren't really there, or we were somewhere else entirely. It didn't feel like a normal detour or a bad route. It felt wrong. Maybe it was just late-night paranoia, or maybe it was something else entirely. But I swear I've never felt that kind of dread before.